Okay, so first, threats to biodiversity. What do you suppose the number one thing in here is? Topic that was discussed in that chapter in general. What was the threat?
Manatees.
It could be us, but it's probably pollution, right? Different kinds of pollution. So pollution can affect our water, right? And it can even affect the air in the sense that you can end up with acid rain when some of those byproducts of burning combustible fossil fuels end up in the atmosphere. It ends up making acid in that rain that falls on us. Now, that's one thing that it sounds really bad, right? You guys know that acids are not good, but it's not one of those things. You don't literally melt if acid rain falls on you. It's not like you're the Wicked West or the Witch of the West or whatever in Wizard of Oz. But acid rain does actually cause a lot of problems in those areas, right? It can drop the pH of the water in a pond, a lake, or something like that. That can affect the organisms that live in there. But it actually affects plant life more than it affects aquatic life, right? You would think pH would be a big deal in the water, but usually there's buffers in that water that can actually maintain the pH at a certain level. So it's not actually going to hurt the water, the living things in the water, as bad as you would think, although it could drop the pH a little bit. What the real big problem is that acid rain, when it falls on ground, on plants in a forest or in a field, wherever, right? Acid rain can strip nutrients out of the soil, which is really bad for plants, right? So the biggest problem is that it does strip nutrients from that soil, making that soil less capable of supporting those plants that you want anyway. Right? So it can drop the pH in an aquatic ecosystem like a pond or a lake, but usually those are buffered, so that's not as big of a problem. But stripping nutrients from the soil, that's a really big issue. Otherwise, another significant topic in that chapter, it's a big ticket item today as far as politics are concerned. What is it? Global warming. And there is plenty of debate as to whether global warming is real or not. Right? Not actually global warming itself. We do think that the Earth, the climate is warming. We're just not really sure if humans cause it or not. We know that that kind of thing can be cyclical, right? Having to do with, all sorts of astronomy things. But we think that possibly us burning all the fossil fuels that we burn might actually contribute to that, right? But we also need to know the difference between global warming that, does exist regardless of whether you believe it does or not. The thing that we're not sure on is do humans cause it? But global warming versus that greenhouse effect.
Excuse this interruption, but if you are planning on attending the Mental Health Careers Camp sponsored by Dr. Kate, would you please get your applications to the guidance office today? Thank you.
We think that burning fossil fuels may add to those greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and it could cause ultimately some warming, right? But also, when we're talking about global warming greenhouse effect, this is actually, generally speaking, a good thing. Why was that greenhouse effect actually really important for us?
It keeps us warm.
It keeps the Earth warm enough to be habitable. There would be no living things on this planet if there wasn't some greenhouse effect. It has to be warm. You just don't want it to be too hot, right? We can actually ultimately run into problems with that global warming because it changes the environment enough that some species can't cope, right? It's going to make a difference at some point or another. So whether humans are causing this global warming or not doesn't really matter, because if it's still happening, we still have to know what to do about the problems that are going to occur as a result of that. it is still really important for us to think about cutting back on fossil fuels, regardless of whether that's causing global warming or not. A, because we're going to run out eventually. B, because of the other pollution problems that we have, right? Our water supply, our acid rain problems in industrialized areas like the northeastern part of this country. So it's really a problem that we have regardless. So although in politics they like to throw out, well, it's causing it or it's not causing it, it doesn't matter if it's causing global warming or not. It really doesn't. We have other issues from burning fossil fuels that we need to deal with, and we probably need to get away from that someday eventually anyway. I know that as far as our economy is concerned, we're probably going to have to use fossil fuels for a while, but it is in our best interest to look into other options, basically. And so since we have these other problems too, the water pollution, the acid rain, right, not just the global warming that may or may not be caused by us, we still have to deal with it in the long run. But it is possible, like I said, scientists actually are conflicting on that currently still. We don't know if it's really caused by us or not, but it's possible that us burning fossil fuels adds to those greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And we do know that those greenhouse gases are higher than they used to be, because that would actually help trap more of that heat and cause that temperature to increase, which is ultimately what global warming is to begin with. And so it's not like global warming doesn't exist. We're just not sure if we caused it or not, but it doesn't really matter if we caused it. We still have issues to deal with either way. Otherwise, a couple other things that got thrown in there. As far as the water's concerned, I think that's where the biomagnification term popped up. Oops. So you know that pollution actually tends to affect those at the top of a food chain as opposed to at the bottom, which obviously would be a problem for you because where are you? You're at the top of the food chain, right? Humans don't have any natural predators, so to speak. Yeah, I guess if you're swimming in shark waters, you could get eaten by something, but for the most part, we don't really have any natural predators, so we're at the top of the food chain, so we're the ones that get affected the most by this, right? That's why it matters. Because even though the plant picks up a little bit of that pollutant, as the cow eats more and more of that plant, it's going to get more and more concentrated within the cow, and then when you eat 47 cheeseburgers, it's even more concentrated in you. So as you go up the food chain, that pollutant actually becomes more and more concentrated. It actually affects organisms more and more. Another note when we were talking about water pollution in your chapter were those indicator species. So amphibians are usually an indicator species because they pick up a lot of the pollutant, not just from eating stuff, but also because they live in water and their skin soaks in those pollutants. So a lot of times they're good indicator species, meaning that if you see problems in them, that means there's problems with our water supply, right? So you can usually see if that frog has an extra leg or something like that, that's not supposed to happen. So when you see that, that's a good indicator to go ahead and check that water and see if it's got a lot of pollutants in it or something like that. Otherwise, our other problem with biodiversity is not just pollution. What else are we doing that prevents or hurts organisms in the long run? As humans continue to develop and expand our own habitats, right? What do we do to that rainforest and everything else? Right? At the same time, we destroy those habitats, right? So as we continue to build and develop, we have a tendency to destroy those habitats for those other organisms, which means that they're going to have trouble in the long run. And even if we're not destroying habitats, sometimes we introduce new species that devastate ecosystems. So if you take a species that's under control, their population's under control in one place, remove them, put them somewhere else where they don't have any natural predators, sometimes they go a little crazy and they start just wiping out their food supply there, and it can cause major effects. It can wreak havoc with those new ecosystems. So there are a lot of topics within this threats to biodiversity. Threats to biodiversity, but I kind of covered everything here. Is there any questions over any of these? Kind of get it? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's not good in a lot of cases. So we got to think about these things in the future when we're trying to make decisions. And that's part of the reason why you need to take biology as a high school student, because you have to make decisions in the future. You get the opportunity to vote on a law that may prevent some of these things from happening, which is the whole point of the next slide, sustainable development.